All right, so fugitives Shepherd Bushiri and his wife Mary now face 2 arrest warrants for violating their bail conditions. The Bushiris were granted bail in 2 separate cases, one for money laundering and fraud, and another relating to the purchase of a private jet from overseas. The Bushiris have handed themselves over, we're told, to police in Malawi and have applied for bail there. Question this morning is, what happens now? Well, to give us some insight, let's bring in Advocate of the High Court, Eshed Cohen, who joins us now live from New Zealand. Eshed, thanks for your time. Welcome to the AM report. So many different considerations to be made, but I want to hone in on this extradition process because I imagine there's still a whole lot more questions than answers. On what basis can Malawi refuse to comply with this process?
Great, no, thanks so much for having me. I thought a good place to start might be just discussing what implications, if any, the arrest of the Bushiris in Malawi might have on the extradition process, and then discussing if there are any new grounds or which grounds at all we can speculate or predict Malawi would invoke to refuse the extradition request. So just on the issue of the arrest, I think there are perhaps 3 possible implications that the arrest might have on the extradition process, depending on the reason for the arrest. And at this stage, assuming that the arrest has happened, it seems like the various news reports suggesting that it has. We don't know. We actually don't know what the reason for the arrests are. And I think three hypothetical reasons at least that we might consider. The first is that they've been arrested pursuant to a proper and formal extradition request from South Africa. That seems unlikely because the South African authorities have said that a formal request hasn't been issued. But if it has, or if Malawi has received what it considers to be a request, then the arrest of then the arrest of the Bushiris would signal what is effectively the start of the extradition process in Malawi. And that's first prize in the sense that now the extradition process would have begun, and we'll find out pretty soon what grounds, if any, Malawi might invoke to resist or to accede to the extradition. The second possibility is that this is actually an arrest pursuant to what's known as a provisional arrest warrant. A provisional arrest warrant is effectively a warrant for a person's arrest who is sought for extradition before a formal extradition request is made, but pending that request. So there was actually an example recently in South Africa in the Chang matter. So Manuel Chang, who was the former Minister of Finance in Mozambique, he was in South Africa for a matter of hours. He was due to just be in transit, going through OR Tambo, and American authorities, along with Interpol and South African authorities, got wind of this, and they issued a provisional arrest warrant, which is an urgent warrant that can be issued before a formal request is made. The idea, of course, is that these extradition requests can take some time to compile, especially if there's a complicated crime in question. And there might not be that much time before the sought person flees the country. So it's possible that the Bushiris have been arrested on a provisional arrest warrant, in which case that's good news in the sense that it means that a formal and full extradition request from South Africa will be forthcoming imminently, just because there's now a time limit, as it were, on the arrest of the Bushiris. There is a third possibility, and that third possibility is that the Bushiris have been arrested for reasons unrelated to the extradition, and potentially for a crime they are alleged to have committed in Malawi. At this point, we don't know what that might be. We could just speculate that perhaps if they entered the country on fraudulent documents or something like that, there might be charges against them for breaching Malawi law. Now that raises an interesting question. If that is the case, we don't know, but if it is the case, then potentially under the SADC protocol on extradition and perhaps even under Malawi law, Malawi might be able to resist or delay the extradition to South Africa until the charges and conviction and sentencing in respect of those crimes have been dealt with under Malawi law. In other words, Malawi might first want to deal with whether the Bushiris have violated Malawi law and committed crimes in Malawi before extraditing them to South Africa. Again, we don't know enough at this point, but those are just sort of 3 possibilities that the arrest of the Bushiris, reported arrest of the Bushiris, might have on the extradition process, each reason for the arrest having different implications and potentially raising different grounds for Malawi to refuse the extradition request.
And one of those, one of those grounds that could be raised, we're told, is that if Malawian authorities actually feel that the Bushiri's rights are being compromised or infringed upon, etc., which is actually the narrative that Shepherd Bushiri has been pushing in various statements over the past few days. Given what we know, is that a possible route you think that can be taken by Malawian governments not to comply with this extradition process? Eshed, are you still with us? All right, it seems we're having some technical difficulties there with Eshed Cohen. Makes sense. He's live to us from New Zealand. He's an advocate of the High Court, helping us to decode the possible, call it, avenues through which this case could go. What we know for certainty at the moment is that Shepherd Bushiri is in Malawi. Many reports corroborating the fact that he has in fact handed himself over to Malawian authorities. The question this morning is on what charges has he handed himself over to authorities in Malawi, and how is that likely to affect this extradition process? We'll try re-establish that connection once again to try answer some of those questions. In fact, I'm told that Eshed is back with us again. Eshed, hopefully you can hear me. What I was trying to ventilate with you just a few moments ago was the basis upon which Malawian authorities can actually refuse to comply with this extradition process. My understanding is that one of those reasons could be if they feel the Bushiris have their rights infringed here in South Africa.
Yes. So the SADC protocol on extradition provides, as many extradition treaties provide, that the requested state, in this case Malawi, can refuse an extradition request if they have substantial grounds for believing that the sought person will face persecution in the requesting state, or if they will face a trial that is unfair, fundamentally unfair. Now, at this stage, the facts behind Bushiri's allegations as to why they feel that they would not face a fair trial in South Africa are largely unknown. How those facts are dealt with and presented within the Malawian extradition process is a question of Malawi law. Certainly in South Africa, those sort of facts are relevant at the stage in which the Minister of Justice decides whether or not to extradite, and those are facts that he must consider under South African law. And obviously, how that exactly plays out in Malawian laws, I'm no expert on that. But the idea is that it's certainly possible if the Bushiris have significant evidence, substantial grounds for evidence for showing that their trial in South Africa would be unfair, then certainly that is a potential ground. But as I say, at this point, it's very unclear, and it's quite a difficult thing to prove. Especially, there's a principle of international law that requires states to not sort of look too deeply into a foreign state's trial, the principle of non-interference. And Malawi and many states are very slow to pronounce on whether another country's system of trying a person is unfair. But again, how it all plays out in Malawian law, we're yet to see. And it will certainly be interesting to see if the Bushiris mount this defense, how they mount it, and how Malawi would respond.
My understanding is that also part of the requirements for a successful extradition to take place is that the crime in question needs to have been committed across both countries. First of all, is that true? And if that's the case, then I imagine this situation could get a whole lot more complex because we don't know how far-reaching the allegations against Bushiri are, at least insofar as across South Africa's borders.
So I think what you might be referring to is known as double criminality. And the requirement isn't so much that the crime happens across both countries. The requirement is that the offense in question, or the conduct in question, has to be an offense in both countries. So, for example, the Bushiris, they're charged with fraud. Now, they've escaped to Malawi. It has to be the case that in Malawi, fraud is also a crime. And if that requirement is met, an extradition is possible. Of course, that's not the only requirement for an extradition to happen, but you're right. It's certainly a very important requirement, double criminality. And there's a lot written on this in various cases in South Africa and abroad in which that requirement hasn't been satisfied. But certainly it would seem that something like fraud would be a crime in Malawi. I'm not entirely sure, but we would hope that it is, or at least suspect that it might be, in which case double criminality wouldn't be an issue on the facts of this case.
Absolutely. Well, hopefully some of those details become confirmed in the next few hours and we'll get a better sense of how things are likely to pan out. Let me thank you for your time and for weighing in on this issue. Eshed Cohen is an advocate of the High Court. Live to us there from New Zealand.